Hello and welcome to the Radiant Astrology Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Caudill. And in today's episode, we're going to be exploring Uranus through Gemini. And I know you've probably already heard so much about Uranus and Gemini because it seems to be all everyone in astrology is talking about. But I felt like I really wanted to explore it from a different perspective because, as you know, Uranus likes us to flip the script and likes to think of things in new ways and have fresh new ideas about things. And I thought the perfect person to invite to discuss this with me today was Dabney Lawless from the Lawless Astrology Channel. She's an evolutionary astrologer, and I've been honored to be on her podcast. And now I'm excited to have her here on the Radiant Astrology Podcast to talk Uranus and Gemini with me. Thank you for joining me, Dabney.
Thanks, Christina. It's fun to be here. Thanks again.
Great. Well, what I'm really excited about is that Dabney is going to be speaking at our summit, the Revolution Rising Astrology for the Zeitgeist Summit. And she will also be taking a different take on some of the real craziness, I guess, of Uranus and Gemini and other outer planets that we have that we're sort of grappling with in these really unprecedented times. So Dabney, do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and a little bit about what you have coming up for the summit?
Yeah. So, kind of dovetails together because, yes, I'm an astrologer. I've been an astrologer for over 20 years, but I've also worked in Silicon Valley for over 20 years. And I have had a front seat to so much that is not known by so many people about the inner workings, basically how the sausage is made. And as we enter Pluto in Aquarius, one of the things that I have had really on my purview to keep an eye out for is the darker side of technology. And because Uranus rules technology, excuse me, not Uranus, Aquarius. Aquarius rules technology. And so Pluto brings up and unearths what needs to be addressed, something that's been simmering under the surface, something that's a wound that needs to be exposed to the light. And I really think that in addition to the power to the people and the income inequality and all those things that we're going to see, it's all kind of tied in together. And we definitely saw with Pluto and Capricorn a dramatic rise of corruption and greed and destabilization of our way of life through Silicon Valley. And so I am looking at now Uranus moving into Gemini and all of the different outer planets taking on new roles in 2026. We're getting a preview now. And so that talk that I do is really about technology. And it's about, is this the seeds of dystopia and destruction, which is a little bit of a narrative that we're all being fed, or are there seeds of hope? And so that's really what I break down. And I look at what I really see for the future with the astrology versus kind of the narratives that are being put out there, like we all need to move to Mars in the next, 100 years.
Right. Well, I think all the billionaires will beat us to it anyway, and they can have Mars. That's fine.
They can have Mars. Please take it. Go.
Well, great. I'm super excited about that. So those of you listening, if you haven't yet signed up for the summit, please go to radiantastrology.com/summit 2025. You will see all of the information there. Also, Dabney has offered an awesome bonus. She's going to be looking at Sam Altman's chart, the OpenAI CEO, and she said she's got some fascinating insights for that as well. For those people who purchase the All Access Pass, you get a lot of great bonuses from many of the speakers, and you'll also get into our astrologer roundtable. And the roundtables, we're going to be discussing Uranus trine Pluto in air signs. So as Uranus is in the early degrees of Gemini, it's going to be trining Pluto in Aquarius. And there's always been some really fascinating sort of accelerated revolutions, and I'm quoting Richard Tarnas from Cosmos and Psyche, that when we have these really strong contacts between Pluto and Uranus, we have both social revolutions as well as technological revolutions. And throughout history, we've seen these. So that's one of the things that we can look forward to. And so at the roundtable, we'll be discussing that. Dabney's going to be one of our panelists. So definitely make sure you sign up for the summit and consider upgrading to the All Access Pass. All right, so for today, I really wanted to see what was on your mind, Dabney, because I know you told me you have a lot to say about Uranus in Gemini. But for those who are, I'd like to talk to people at all different levels. So just, kind of a summary of the basics of the archetype of Uranus in Gemini. How can people sort of wrap their minds around this?
Okay. So first off, I want to break down the fact that Uranus moving into Gemini means that it has been in Taurus. So Uranus, anytime Uranus is in a sign, we look, it impacts our own personal lives. And that's something we can talk about a little later in the podcast. But if we're looking at collectively, Uranus takes the collective and says, okay, focus in on this area, this zodiac sign for a number of years, like 8 years. And we're going to shake things up here. There's going to be intention put here and something needs to change. So that's the biggest thing that I want us to kind of look at is like anytime Uranus is in Gemini, it has been on the heels of Uranus and Taurus. And each zodiac sign in many ways is a reaction to the sign before it. Okay. So since 2018, we've had Uranus and Taurus. And Taurus likes safety. Taurus likes security. Taurus is about the land. It's about boundaries. It's about feeling secure and comfortable, having enough to eat. So it rules things like agriculture and it rules things like borders and land boundaries. Okay. So what's been up, right? A lot of changes in migration patterns. And and also it has to do with health in a lot of ways, like feeling like my body is taken care of. It's very much in the body. And so during Uranus and Taurus, what did we have? We had a pandemic. We had COVID. Okay. We had a lot of hysteria around border crossings and changes. And it also has to do with Mother Earth and nature. And we've had a dramatic rise where it's like really come into our consciousness, like, oh, climate change is happening. Like these things are happening to me. It's not some like distant future thing that we need to worry about. It's like, it's here. And so we just had Uranus at 29 degrees of Taurus. And anytime a sign is in its what's called anaretic degree, its very last degree, it is very potent. And it has a very strong expression of like, what is this all about? And we just had these massive floods in Texas that were tragic beyond belief. And so that was literally on the 29th degree of Taurus. So throughout history, and I love to do history and astrology together because I'm sort of a history nerd. And on top of that, and I'm an astrology nerd. And so putting the two together helps me understand the world that I live in now. And so I'm seeing like how literal things are and how there are so many repetitions of what has happened in the past. And so once you move into Gemini, Gemini is about ideas. Gemini is about transportation. Gemini is about, you had mentioned duality, like it's the twins, right? And so it can be about siblings, but a lot of what Gemini is about historically has been breakthroughs of ideas because Uranus is a breakthrough. Uranus is a lightning strike. Uranus is an earthquake. It's something that shakes it up. And Gemini is very open-minded. Gemini is experimental. Gemini wants to do things differently. So whereas Taurus can be very fixed and is like, I want to protect myself. I want to build the wall, like at all costs. Like I want you to get away from me so I am comfortable. I want a big pillow and I want to eat my cake. Gemini comes in is like, oh my God, let's have a party. I think that it's a much better idea to get off the couch, turn off the TV, and let's have a pool party. Like, let's get out there. Let's do things differently. Let's think differently. And so that's why we've had these amazing technological breakthroughs that have been that have impacted society throughout, Uranus and Gemini. Like that's the Industrial Revolution. That's like, and it's also big wars in the United States. And that's something that, people have talked a lot about. So we have a different example that we're going to focus on, but I'll just take a breath.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for all that. I was just this morning, I saw a quote by Toni Morrison, and she'd said, I don't want to be consumed by things. I want to be consumed by ideas, by thoughts. And I think we are collectively shifting from that. Like we may have been during a time, because, we also had the North Node and Jupiter in the last few years going through Taurus. So there's been a lot of Taurus, like I need to have a steady income. I need to have a roof over my head. I need to have enough to eat and everything like that. And that can really consume a person. But there is something too about Taurus always having the sort of blinders on and just kind of putting the head down and doing the work and things like that, that can really kind of be a little soulless unless there is something, a real why. And I think now with Uranus going into Gemini, it can be that searching for the why, and where we may even be willing to throw away, because Uranus, they always say, be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's what they always say about when you have a Uranus transit, because in an air sign like Gemini, we may feel a lot more attached to, say, who we are, our identity, because of how we align with certain ideas. That is who we are. That gives us a sense of safety. And that gives us a sense of, being interested in life. And so there could be more of a collective move from that Taurian having to be, safe and secure and grounded, and being able to risk it all because, of some truth or of some new idea or paradigm that, as Victor Hugo said, there's nothing stronger on this earth than an idea whose time has come. And when we are so driven by an ideal or ideas, or what we consider truths, then we'll be willing to change the world around us. And one of the things I want to even sort of kind of mention, even before the Uranus and Taurus, it reminded me of when Uranus was in Aries, prior to that. So that would have probably, I think, like 2011 through 2018. And that was the big thing during that time was Brexit. I mean, at least in Europe and in the UK, where, there's this whole movement to break the UK away from Europe. And a lot of people were against it, but there was this small faction of people who were so passionate about that. And they were able to do it. And now, all these years later, they're starting to, even recently, I've been seeing a lot of like this Brexit regret, because people realize that, with Aries, it could just be the sudden, like, this passion or this impulse or instinct, and so going from this passionate instinct of Aries into the, keeping myself safe and having what's mine and only mine, right, of Taurus, to then maybe an evolution of, something that's maybe in between there that has to do with, what is the truth? What is the information telling us? How can we read between the lines to really get to the truth of the matter of things?
Yeah, I think
And so, yeah.
this rise, when you bring back all the way to Uranus and Aries, I mean, that is like there was a rise in kind of individuality and selfishness, to be honest with you, like kind of like a self-centered, like this is my identity. And that's, even in the United States, there was kind of this, it really was a dramatic change right around 2018, like
2017, 2018, yeah.
right. And so, and even before then, there was this rise of just like, what do I want? right? And so that's very much Aries, like what's in it for me? The grievance, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. There was like much more grievance politics that came to rise during Uranus and Aries, and then that kind of really fed into that Uranus and Taurus, which is then like fear-based in a lot of ways. Like if you're really like there to protect yourself, you kind of, if throughout history during Uranus and Taurus, we've seen the rise of these kind of strong men leaders who say, like, I alone can fix it during Uranus and Taurus. And so you have like the rise of fascism in the 1930s. And then one of the examples that we were talking about before we started here was the Salem Witch Trials, where there was the puritanical leaders, the reverends, and kind of saying like, no, I'm going to fix this. And then you had kind of this mass hysteria of blaming other people for your ills. So we were looking at the Salem Witch Trials. I don't know if you want to bring that chart up yet or not.
Yeah, let me bring that chart up. Let's see. And it's so fascinating because we can see a lot of echoes from then to now. And I think that's so important for us to really get a sense of, maybe we might not see the exact same thing play out in the exact same way, but humanity reacts, the collective reacts in certain ways when the planets are doing certain things. And you had said earlier that even though Uranus wasn't even discovered at this time, it was still out there and it was still, making these or affecting this archetype in the collective. And Uranus can be very much, it can be a separating energy. Instead of bringing people together like Venus, it can like sort of shatter and separate and disturb. And that's why we consider it to be chaotic. So here I have, well, let me say, I have 1693, but you said it was actually 1691.
I think you can leave the 1693 chart up
Okay.
just for a minute, but just basically, I think setting the stage that the 1692 is when the Salem Witch Trials happened. But here, it's kind of like what's happening today, where it didn't just happen overnight. There was a lead up to this. And, when you look up what are the main reasons, like why did the Salem Witch Trials happen? Well, there was an influx of French colonists after a war in Europe. Okay, so here we have refugees coming. And then they had an epidemic of smallpox.
I'll go back a little bit.
And then there was a growing rivalry within the neighbors around resources. And so these sort of simmering tensions around resources, okay? So in land disputes, and so there was kind of a lot of things that echo what's happening today, like an influx of refugees, a pandemic, right? There's, that threatens people's safety. So people are already kind of keyed up to feel threatened in some way. They feel like their safety is destabilized. And then Neptune was also in Pisces, as it has been. And Neptune in Pisces can really be dystopian fantasies. It can feel like the end of the world. It can feel like, you're at the end. I mean, Neptune in Pisces is the end of the zodiac before something new begins. Right. And so you've got this. I mean, the Neptune in Pisces can be beautiful, but it seems to be coinciding, at least within the Salem Witch Trials and of late, kind of this, the fake news, believing things that aren't true because you're already keyed up to feel it. So then there's this hysteria around things that are just insane, like, like the Pizzagate and the cabal, right? Like, how is that any different than, blaming the midwife for possessing everyone? And, you know what I mean? It's kind of that same hysteria that makes no rational sense. But if you're caught up in this fear and dystopia, this dystopian thinking, you start to think like, this is the end of the world, I'm going to die. And so it really is this fear of death in a lot of ways that allows you to, it creates a vacuum for somebody who wants to be authoritarian and take over to say, yes, This is awful and I'm going to fix it. Right. And so that's where the
Hmm.
power comes into play. But then Uranus moves into Gemini. And
So
this,
Uranus moved into Gemini about 1691, and that was the start of the actual witch trials. So it was previous to that, with Uranus going through Taurus, like you said, was the mass hysteria, very much the Neptune and Pisces, the paranoia, and then, as you said, the Uranus and Taurus is the blaming the others, the fights over land and food and things like that. And so, yeah, I just wanted to sort of highlight that with this chart.
thank you. Yeah, exactly. And so I think it mirrors a lot of what's happening today in the sense that once the Salem witch trials happened, it was almost like there was no going back, right? Like the hysteria sort of took over. And you notice that Neptune was still in Pisces. Now we're sort of lucky that we have Neptune in Aries right now, but it's going to dip back into Pisces. But we're seeing this, like, these raids of like masked people, like taking people off the street. We're seeing things that we never would have imagined could happen. And I think that's similar to what happened during the Salem witch trials, where, it wasn't like every single person in the village was like, yeah, let's go. I mean, there were a lot of people that were frightened, that felt like this didn't make any sense. And eventually, as Uranus moved further into Gemini, people started seeing the reality of their fears manifesting, and that it's really like tragic, and that their neighbors were being killed or their neighbors were being imprisoned, and that
Or
this was
burned at the stake. They really did
burned
burn
at the
people,
stake.
burn women at
Yes,
the
like
stake.
tortured. I mean, some really horrific things were happening. And there was a sense by 1693 of no more. So that's when pardons began. And that was Uranus and Gemini too. So to me, I kind of look at it like Uranus and Gemini was also World War II. Here's our entrance into World War II. It's kind of like we had to think differently, and we had to do something about this because it had gotten too bad. Like it had gone too far. And now you have to pick a side. What side are you on? Are you on the side of the people like snatching your neighbors and putting them in jail, or are you against that? And there is this kind of bifurcation of thought where you have to pick a side, and oftentimes new ideas come to the front and people see things differently during Uranus and Gemini.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so interesting because, during that time, like the first ingress, of that planet, especially an outer planet, it can really like put on notice, that entire zodiac, right? All the planets in that zodiac. And so the zodiac sign. And say, for instance, when Uranus is just entered Gemini, if you have any planets in Gemini, even if it's going to be years before Uranus gets to them, they're like on alert, right? They suddenly have to kind of get with the program. They have to start like whether it's speeding up or just getting loose from their habitual patterns. Now, the beauty of Gemini is Gemini kind of is, naturally sort of like distracted in a way. It has capacity to handle a lot of things. It's like, going to the buffet or the poo-poo platter or whatever I always say. And so it's like we want more. We want more information, and we want more, because it's gossip as much as it is news and information too. It's all of those things. So I feel like Uranus has kind of like a natural affinity to, this mutable air sign. And I would imagine that our ideas could change from one time to another. I also imagine that we could have the capacity to handle a lot more information. Do you remember how it used to be like, when we're so new to this 24-hour news cycle, and there would be like one major story and people could only handle one major story at a time. And now we can actually handle more. And I think that that's actually good for the collective, because if there's a lot being thrown at us, it's meant to overwhelm us. I think people are, with Uranus and Gemini, we might feel less like overwhelmed, like we can't handle it. I mean, yes, there's times where we do have to sort of take a break and shut things down and unplug. But in a way, I think our capacity is getting greater because we have to. We have to keep up with all the changes and with all the news and even all of these, crazy things that are, trying to come at us. And, how do we combat something like a strong man? How do we combat some of these things that have been with humanity a long time? Usually with, strong men, they take advantage of the fact that people feel so powerless and so helpless that they want someone to take over. They want like a daddy figure, to just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And that might have been more the case with the, Neptune in Pisces, feeling powerless, feeling overwhelmed,
Not
and
seeing clearly.
Uranus and Taurus. Yeah, exactly. Not seeing clear, believing anything that was, fed to you as well.
Yeah. What I'm encouraged by right now for us, not only about the trine, which we'll talk about during the summit, but the astrology is so different coming up. I mean, we're in it actually right now. We're getting this preview because Uranus just went into Gemini. Okay, we've got Jupiter in Cancer. And we've got Saturn and Neptune both in Aries. Now, Neptune's just gone retrograde. And the fall and into the early winter, we are definitely going to see a revisiting of a lot of the decisions that we have made collectively in our own lives and on the collective, where we have to clean up some of the old world, some of the things that maybe we didn't get right. But in this preview, what I am seeing is I'm seeing some new leaders emerge, like Mandani. There's people coming out of nowhere. Saturn and Neptune, both in Aries, to me, is much more optimistic that we have an opportunity to take back control and have courage to not be so fearful, right? Like to see things more clearly. I mean, there was just a poll that came out that people's view of immigrants has changed so dramatically over the past year, whereas like it was like 88%. I don't know the exact, so I shouldn't, but it was a dramatic shift in support for immigration, where it's like it's breaking through that like, oh, we need people to help work the land. We need people, these people contribute to society. These people who actually are our neighbors there's benefits. Whereas before there was just this negative narrative about, caravans coming over the border. There's kind of been a shift in thinking already. So I think Neptune and Saturn, both in Aries, is going to give people courage. It's going to help people see things more clearly. It's going to help people come to their own individual conclusions, less about what the collective says. And then Uranus moving into Gemini gives that additional support of like opening your mind to new ideas and a different way of seeing things and kind of questioning, because Uranus questions everything. Uranus questions things, and so does Gemini, actually. But Gemini is what I meant, is like Gemini and Uranus both have chaos in common. So I wouldn't expect this to be a super mellow, chill time. So if everybody's like, I really would like to kick back, that's probably not going to happen. But I do think this is going to be a very dynamic time where there's less fear and more new ideas that can lead us to our future.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you were saying about within the Salem witch trials, it was people suddenly saw that these witches were actually their neighbors. They were actually other human beings, and then also come back to now with Uranus in Gemini, like these immigrants that used to be like, oh, these foreigners, you know, now that we've seen how inhumane a lot of them have been treated, people realize that these are our neighbors. There are people who, and they're also our fellow human beings as well. So there's something there about, when you look at the natural zodiac, Gemini is associated with the third house, which is our neighbors and our neighborhood. And I think it was the astrologer April Elliott Kent who said something about Uranus and Gemini has had this alignment with things like the cities and suburbs and neighborhoods and things like that. Like the idea of suburbs actually became a thing. Um,
And the
I
50s,
think it was yeah, in the 50s
which was
and
Uranus and Gemini too. Yeah. Late
exactly. It
40s.
was because, and it had to do with, first of all, with transportation. So we know that Gemini is ruled by Mercury, right? And Mercury is the god of transportation. And it had to do with, even in the United States, we don't have a whole lot of mass transportation everywhere, but that was the first time at that time, the last time Uranus was in Gemini in the 50s, that they had transportation for people to come, to go from the cities out of the cities a little bit, and then they could have their suburban life. So perhaps we'll see something new develop around cities transportation. We know that we're going to expect some transportation. Maybe there'll be a bus to the moon for all the billionaires or no, to Mars rather, that they can all
Yeah.
take their trips up to the moon and Mars or whoever. And but the way we relate, but when you're talking, the way you were talking about, like, how we see people that maybe we weren't aware of before. And then we realize, wait a second, these people are my neighbors. And in the third house, the astrology chart, it has to do with the extensions of ourselves.
Mhm.
So, we think of it as siblings because these are the first people that we, engage with kind of like on our level,
Mhm.
when we're children, or people like siblings. So when you think of Gemini like characters in your life, or even Mercurial like characters, if you don't have siblings, everybody has those long-term friends from childhood, right? Because
Yeah,
Gemini also kind
cousins
of
and
childhood. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
like, and they might as well be siblings, right? I mean, there's really not much difference. But those extensions of ourselves in our family, those extensions of ourselves in our, in our environment, our neighbors, our neighborhood, so I think that's really interesting to start to see that these people, that maybe the revolution and some of that, that having to speak out for what's right and things like that for people that, again, maybe they're not related to you. Maybe you would never know them otherwise, but you have some kind of affinity with them because you see them as a reflection of you. And so that's kind of part of the Gemini archetype is you start to see yourself in these other people. And, and
Right.
you
And
start
I
to
mean,
see that they deserve to be treated like humans too.
right. And there's a lot of stories going around where people, and I genuinely do believe this. So, I do believe there are quite a few people that were anti-immigrant because they were told that everyone was coming in caravans and MS-13 and they were taking your jobs. But then when you see somebody that works at the local diner who is a friend of yours be put in a detention center, you start to question and say, well, that she's not MS-13. She's been here for 40 years and she has a family. Why is she in a detention center? I'm very confused. And that to me is that all of these planets working together, and we're going to see more of that. You had brought up a really good point about transportation. And I do think that the technology and the transportation is something that's going to definitely be revolutionized throughout the next decade. One of the things I just read today is that hackers can get into the trains and push the brakes. I just read that headline today, and that was like a warning to people taking trains because like hackers are apparently like able to do this. And that is very like Uranus and Gemini, Pluto and Aquarius. I think we're going to have to come up with a lot of new solutions as we see the darker side of technology become more and more prevalent in our lives. And that's going to be inescapable. But ultimately, I'm seeing people like actually talking about things that have been happening for many years that no one really had conscious awareness of. No one knew who Curtis Yarvin was. No one was talking about the disrupting factor of technology as like a challenge in our lives through AI versus what we've just come to accept. And it has been incredibly disruptive in our lives. And it has changed elections. It has caused global upheaval and, in some cases, people dying. And so I think a lot of that's going to come to light, and we're going to have new solutions and to look at things differently.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah,
really
and
hoping for some new regulations, eventually. We're not going to get it right now, obviously, but I'm hoping in the future we get some guardrails.
I think also like freedom of speech is like a general sort of concept because you would normally, I would think Uranus and Gemini, okay, like, that's a time when I believe, was it the printing press or there was something like,
Yeah.
yeah, I believe it was the printing press was invented during Uranus and Gemini, where it was the first time where there was mass printing. So people, there was mass ability to
Yeah, it
read
changes
the same
society
thing.
dramatically
And that
every
changed
single
the
time.
society as results. But right now with we're having Uranus trine Pluto, and I want to hear from you and the other astrologers on the panel about, we are seeing things like NPR being threatened by the current administration, the major news channels being threatened, also being sued and for just reporting the news. So I often think that, when Pluto's involved, there could be a struggle there. There could be that, immovable force, trying to impose its will on what Uranus is all about, liberating and being free. So it's like, who's going to win out of this? But, it could make it stronger potentially, like we may be, have never really appreciated how much we do have freedom of speech until it's threatened. And then once it's threatened, then we may actually start to see the value and start to see like why it's worth standing up for and fighting for, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've working in, PR for all these years. Like,
Oh, that's right. You're a
yeah,
PR pro.
I'm on
So
the front
what do you
lines.
think about, yeah, tell us about what
Legacy
you see and
media
hear.
is dying, and the good news is that and that's Neptune and Pisces. We're seeing the last gasps, really. But now Neptune's moving into Aries. I mean, it's in Aries now, but it's not permanently in Aries because we're going to have the retrograde. But Neptune in Aries and Saturn in Aries, very much, independent media. I mean, that's it. It's like, it's going to change, So when before it was Walter Cronkite, and then you had CNN 24-hour news, and then you had like, everyone's getting their news off of a news, like Facebook, right? So now and that's kind of that like watered down collective that can be manipulated, right? And that's where the fake news came into play with Neptune and Pisces. But as Neptune moves into Aries, we are seeing people like independent journalists and people who were in these legacy positions like Jim Acosta and stuff going and starting their own thing and, taking people with them. So I, really, I am still in this business. So, I look at legacy media, but where I get my news personally is more from independent journalists that I know are not accountable to corporate interests.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's going to be more of that. It's going to be more of this like scrappy, like, I've got a microphone and I'm, doing the investigative journalism that used to be done. It's almost like a full circle sort of moment, right? So
Mm.
that's what I think is it's an evolution, and we're going to see more Substack, YouTube, like that's where people are
Yeah.
going.
I was also thinking that because any of these other legacy media, they kind of control the narrative. And I think a lot of people are frustrated. And, usually when I hear frustration, I think, what's Uranus doing? Because things start as dissatisfaction, frustration until something breaks loose, right? And breaks free. And I think people can just sense when they're not really being told the truth, when they're being, the truth is being manipulated or watered down because of, Jeff Bezos owns, the
Well, and
Washington
that's
Post or
Taurus.
whatever.
Taurus is money, and the billionaires, corporate billionaires bought all of the legacy media, and they do control the narratives. Like that's just reality now. It wasn't reality, I can tell you. It was, there was a little of that, but it was not like it is today. It just isn't. Where, they've had mass layoffs, AI writes a lot of stuff, they all copy each other. It's a very controlled narrative that didn't used to be. And I don't want to spread conspiracy theories, I'm just telling you what I've seen. But that's the thing, like, to your point, once people start to recognize, like, I can no longer trust this, or I'm no longer interested in this, then they find alternate solutions, and that's Uranus and Gemini. And so just everything is kind of conspiring to bring us into this new reality where the world's going to look very different in 5 years than it does right now. Like, does that mean that we won't have trees and we won't still have our dogs and cats? No, it's not like that. But like, things look really different than they did 10 years ago. So I'm somewhat optimistic that, the dystopian timeline that we've been living in will shift in the next few years, and things might get a little bit more action oriented, and we can feel a little bit more in control of our own destiny.
So, for people who are watching this and wanting to know, what should they look for in their own lives, and in their natal charts with Uranus going into Gemini? I mean, my first thing is, look at the house that Gemini rules. Whenever I look at outer planets, I like to look at the whole sign house, because to me, that sign rules that entire house. And so to me, that house is like suddenly, they're, like I said, on notice, and all the planets in that house and in that sign, they know that they're going to have to deal at some point with Uranus, which wants change. And actually, sometimes Uranus wants like the complete opposite from what you've always known or what you've always thought you've wanted. And it can be thrilling too. It can be exciting. It can be new. There can be like a freshness to it. But it can also, especially in the beginning, I think the ingresses can be often the most challenging because we're not used to it. There's some disturbance. There's some sort of chaotic character coming through the front door, and and some can be very difficult. I mean, Uranian transits, when they are difficult, they can be very tough. It can be like, being sideswiped, or something falling apart, or some kind of a shock or something like that. But it doesn't always have to be, it's not always that way. Sometimes it is like, a refreshing opportunity. And again, in Gemini, I think it's where we're used to thinking things are a certain way, or a certain, we do things in our Gemini way, which could be kind of distracted, or doing things to kind of just get like a little bit of information here or there and put together the pieces in our own unique way. Well, Uranus, and especially with AI and things like that, is going to be transforming, the entire landscape, but in our own personal lives. Particularly, I would look at the the themes of that house and see, how can you innovate? How can you be open to change? And how can you go with the energy? Because there's no like denying or closing the door on Uranus. Uranus is coming, and it wants you to kind of get with the program in your life, to take advantage of these new opportunities. And as you said, Dabney, like for many of us, yeah, it's so sad that we might be losing like NPR and things as we know it. I'm not saying it's going away. I'm just saying, as we know it, things are obviously changing for legacy media. But what are the opportunities? What is opening wide in front of us, in our own lives, especially in that house where Uranus is going to be visiting for the next 8 years. So what do you think, Dabney? What kind of advice do you have for our listeners?
The one thing I'll say is I believe NPR will be saved by individuals. I do think, and then I think it will actually evolve from there. So I don't think National Public Radio is necessarily going to go away. I do believe funding will go away. Okay, so in our own personal lives, I'm a Placidus girl, so I'm a little different in the sense that I look at where Uranus is versus exclusively where Gemini is in the house. Although I agree with everything that you just said. So I definitely would look at what house Uranus is in your chart. And if it's in your 10th house, that's a change in career, right? Like, so really looking at the themes of the house that it's in and recognizing it's time for you to open your mind. That's the biggest message in my mind to Uranus and Gemini is like, how can I do things differently? How can I open my mind? Where have I been too rigid, too stuck, had only one point of view? Gemini likes to have fun. And that's something that I think has been sorely lacking in at least my life, the past, since Uranus entered Taurus. Like it has been a very heavy time for a lot of us that are kind of concerned about what's happening in our country. And lately I've been recognizing that with Uranus moving into Gemini, there's different ways to look at things. And so that doesn't mean not being compassionate, not being empathetic, not being an activist. You have to do what you're called to do, and that's where you find your north and south node information most important because that's going to give you clues as to who you are and what you're here to do. But we have to reclaim a sense of joy and open to looking at things differently. No matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, there is an opportunity to look at things differently. And that's where I think that, don't just dig your heels in. Open your mind up, reach out to people, talk to people. It's really that think differently. And in your own personal life, it's like, where can I think differently around something that's really held me back or I've been feeling stuck, right? So if Uranus is in your 11th house, like, have your friendships outlived their usefulness? Like, have you outgrown these people? Like, join some new clubs, join some new groups, do something differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I can I say something about
yeah.
that too? I really think that I really associate Gemini a lot with our friends, and our friend groups and things like that, because again, it's those people who kind of like reflect us. And I often see, especially when people maybe they suddenly get into astrology or they suddenly get into tarot or something. It didn't even have to be metaphysical. It could just be they found a purpose and they're passionate about it and they want to go for it and their life changes as a result. And there can be a time of being alone and feeling like an exile, which is
Mhm.
kind of like a Uranian journey until you find your people. But you have to go through that, through that journey of
Yep.
really finding yourself first. And, other people may not like that if they feel like you're not the person that they're always so used to. But if you find that, your mind and your interests and your curiosity, as Liz Gilbert says, follow your curiosity. If it's taking you elsewhere, then again, there could be a time of feeling alone or, alone with this change and transformation you're going through. But eventually, once you find yourself, you will find your people and you'll find your, we used to say find your tribe. I don't think we can say that anymore, but you'll find your group or your allies, and it could be in surprising ways or surprising types of people or unexpected dynamics of relationships, not the usual type of like my closest friends are like people that I'm always on Signal with or like WhatsApp, it's like I don't always see them very much. And that's friendship these days. I don't know, but I still have this affinity. So however we start forming friendships and forming communities, we need to be open to the new ways of doing those.
Absolutely. And I think that we're going to be supported by that as long as we can keep an open mind and we can experiment with new things and welcome pleasant surprises. That's like it does. I think it really is about surprising yourself and being open to that, right? Like, so you said, like, let's say Uranus is in your eighth house. Maybe suddenly you realize you do love tarot or oracle cards, like, and that puts you on a new journey. I think we're all ready to go on a new journey, and it's just going to manifest in different ways depending on, what's in your chart and where your north node is, and just be open. That's my big advice.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Dabney. This has been such a delight to connect with you again on the podcast. Tell our listeners what you have coming up, where they can find you, anything they need to know before we wrap up.
Okay, yeah. So I'm on YouTube, the Lawless Astrology Channel. So lawless, like as in, without law. And for the month of July, I have made my foundations beginner course half off. So it's only $39 to take my
Wow.
astrology foundations
Great.
course. And then of course I've got the summit with you coming up, which is exciting in August. So I'm sure Christina will put all of the information for the summit there, but I hope you come and listen to my talk because I did a little research and I hope you like it.
Awesome. I can't wait to hear what you've got to share with us. And I'm so excited that you're going to be joining the summit. So, yeah, just again, be sure you sign up for our Revolution Rising, the Astrology for the Zeitgeist Summit. It's August 8th through 10th, just as Mercury is about to station direct. So, hopefully, it'll give us some fresh ideas and we'll open our minds to the beauty of astrology. And we'd love to have you join us. It's free to register, so definitely check out the link below. And again, Dabney, it was such a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, Christina.
Bye.